My nephew Leo is a fighter. I don't mean that in a cliché greeting card kind of way. I mean, I was there. I saw him at 7 years old with tubes coming out of his impossibly small arms, looking up at me with these huge, tired eyes and still managing a little half-smile. He fought leukemia for 2 brutal years. And he won. He absolutely, unequivocally won. The day his oncologist told us he was in full remission was the best day of my family's life. We cried, we celebrated, we breathed for what felt like the first time in forever. Leo got to go back to being a kid. Mud-stained jeans, scraped knees, an obsession with video games. All of it. He was our golden child, our little miracle, and my sister Chloe. She was the perfect mother through it all. Tireless, devoted, a warrior at his bedside. So when she called me 6 months ago, her voice cracking with a carefully rehearsed sob, and told me the cancer was back, my world just collapsed all over again. A relapse. The word itself feels like a physical blow. Of course, I didn't question it. How could I? This was Chloe, the supermom. This was Leo, my little champion. My only thought was, what do we need to do? What we needed, apparently, was money. A lot of it. Chloe started a GoFundMe page the very next day. It was effective. Pictures of a smiling, healthy Leo from last summer were plastered next to long, rambling paragraphs filled with medical jargon I didn't understand. Phrases like aggressive cell mutation and experimental immunotherapy. Her pleas were gut-wrenching, painting a picture of a desperate mother willing to do anything to save her son. And it worked. The donations poured in. $10,000, then 30, then 50. My parents mortgaged their house. I emptied my savings. We were all in. We had to be. But a few weeks ago, a strange sour feeling started to curdle in my stomach. I was scrolling through my phone one night, my heart heavy after reading Chloe's latest update, a tearful post about how the first round of treatment had failed and they needed another $75,000 for a specialist in Switzerland. I felt that familiar ache, that protective urge for Leo. I was about to click the donate button again, when I switched over to Instagram, and there was Chloe, a new post from that afternoon. She was at a Michelin star restaurant downtown, the kind of place with a 6-month waiting list. She was holding up a glass of champagne, and sitting on the table next to her, gleaming under the low light, was a brand new Louis Vuitton handbag. The caption read, "Treating myself to a little moment of peace in all this chaos. Mom strong." I stared at the picture, the two realities warring in my head. The desperate mother begging for money for a dying child, and the socialite showing off a $5,000 purse. It didn't make sense. My first instinct, the one I've been conditioned to have my entire life, was to make an excuse for her. Maybe a friend bought it for her. Maybe she's just trying to feel normal for a night. That's my role in the family, you see. I'm the peacekeeper, the one who smooths things over when Chloe gets too... Chloe. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from our mom. "Ethan, did you see Chloe's new post?" "I hope you donated. Leo needs us all right now. The pressure, the guilt. It was suffocating. My gut was screaming that something was wrong, but my sense of family duty was louder. With a feeling of profound self-loathing, I opened the GoFundMe page and donated another $2,000. Not 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with manufactured gratitude. "Oh, Ethan, I just saw," she cooed. "Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. You've always been his hero, you know. The only one who really truly gets how serious this is." I mumbled something about doing anything for Leo, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I knew I was being played, being managed, but hearing her call me his hero, it worked. It was the button she knew to push, and she pushed it perfectly. I hung up the phone telling myself I was just being paranoid, that I needed to trust my sister, and I almost believed it right up until the day she asked me to help her move her new 75-inch television. "Ethan, you have to come over, I'm desperate." Chloe's voice crackled through the phone, a perfect blend of frantic and put upon. "This charity, they're just saints, absolute saints. They donated a new television for Leo, you know, so he can be comfortable while he's resting. But the delivery guys just left it in the box in the middle of the living room, and it's enormous. I can't possibly lift it myself." I felt that familiar tug of obligation. Of course, a charity. It made a sort of sense. There are organizations that do things like that for sick kids. "Yeah, sure, Chloe, I can be there in 20 minutes, I said, already grabbing my keys. My internal peacekeeper was relieved. "See?" it whispered. "She's not just buying designer bags. She's getting donations. You're being a jerk." When I walked into her house, the box was, as she'd said, enormous. It was a brand new, top-of-the-line OLED TV, the kind that costs more than my first car. It was sitting there like a black monolith in her perfectly decorated living room. Leo was on the couch watching a cartoon on his iPad looking fine. He gave me a little wave. "Isn't it amazing?" Chloe said, beaming. "Now he won't have to strain his eyes watching the old one." We wrestled the thing out of the box and onto the wall mount. It was heavy and my back protested, but we got it done. Okay, I just need a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten these safety screws, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. Oh, God. Chloe looked around vaguely. Check the kitchen junk drawer. If not there, try the desk in my little office. There's a drawer full of junk in there, too. It's probably in there somewhere. The kitchen drawer was a bust. Just soy sauce packets and dead batteries. So I went into her office, a small room that was as meticulously organized as the rest of her house, except for the one drawer she'd mentioned. I pulled the handle. It was a chaotic mess of old takeout menus, tangled charger cables, and expired coupons. Classic junk drawer. I started rummaging around, pushing aside a stack of old mail. Underneath it was a plain manila folder. I wouldn't have even noticed it, except for the logo printed in the top left corner. The Children's Hospital. My heart didn't just sink. It plunged. It was a physical sensation, a sudden cold weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. All the doubt, all the suspicion I'd been suppressing vanished, replaced by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated terror. This was it. This was the report confirming the relapse. This was the piece of paper that proved her GoFundMe stories were real, and that my nephew was dying. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was the date printed in crisp black ink. It was from last week. My eyes scanned the page, my brain bracing for the clinical, devastating words. But they weren't the words I was expecting. I read the paragraph once, then twice, then a third time. The letters seeming to rearrange themselves into nonsense before finally snapping into sharp, horrific focus. It was from his oncologist, Dr. Evans. And it said, Leo continues to show no signs of malignant activity. All blood markers are within normal parameters. He is, by all medical definitions, fully in remission. Recommend follow-up in 6 months for routine monitoring. Fully in remission. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of my mind. I looked at the date again, last week. This wasn't an old report. This was a current, official, clean bill of health. And then, my mind made the final sickening connection. The GoFundMe update. The one from yesterday. The one where Chloe had tearfully written that they needed another $10,000 because Leo's body was rejecting the treatment, and they had to start preparing for palliative care. A wave of nausea washed over me so intensely I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The air in the room felt thick, unbreathable. From the living room I could hear the bright, tinny theme song of a cartoon startup on the new television, followed by a burst of delighted laughter from Leo. The sound, once the sweetest in the world, was now the soundtrack to a monstrous, unthinkable lie. I stood there, frozen in her perfect little office, holding the proof in my shaking hand, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had to face her. I just had to figure out how. I walked out of her office, the medical report clutched in my hand. The paper felt strangely heavy, like it was weighted with the truth. From the living room, I could hear Leo giggling at the cartoon on his brand-new charity-donated television. The sound was a physical pain, a sharp counterpoint to the ugly reality I was now holding. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and fury. There has to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. This is Chloe, my sister. She wouldn't. She couldn't. My core flaw, the one I've lived with my whole life, is that I will do anything to avoid a fight, anything to keep the fragile piece of our family intact. And right now, it was screaming at me to just put the paper back in the drawer, walk away, and pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't. I looked at the doorway to the living room, where that little boy was sitting, and knew I couldn't. I found Chloe in the kitchen, humming to herself as she wiped down her pristine granite countertops. She looked up and smiled when I walked in, a bright, carefree expression that made my stomach clench. "Find the screwdriver?" she asked. I held up the paper. My hand was shaking just slightly. I tried to keep my voice even, gentle. I wasn't accusing. I was just asking. "Chloe, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I found it in the drawer. I thought Leo was sick. For a split second, her smile froze. I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by a storm front of absolute rage. Her face, so beautiful and serene moments before, twisted into a mask of fury. She lunged forward and snatched the paper from my hand, crumpling it in her fist. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How dare you go through my private things? Are you trying to kill me? Is that it? You want to pile on more stress while my son is dying in the next room?" I stumbled back, stunned by the sheer force of her attack. "What? No, The date?" "The date?" she shrieked, her voice rising. "It's an outdated report, you idiot. They send these things out all the time. It was a clerical error. They sent it by mistake." She was firing off excuses, her eyes darting around the room, never quite meeting mine. Her story was changing with every breath. "Chloe, it says last week," I said, trying to keep my own voice from shaking. "And it says he's in remission. It's wrong. The system is wrong. Do you have any idea what it's like dealing with these hospital administrators? She was pacing now, a caged animal. This is exactly what I don't need right now. My own brother, my family turning on me. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of my bond with Leo. The accusation was so insane, so out of left field, that it left me speechless. And in that moment of my stunned silence, she made her final, masterful move. The rage vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a flood of huge, theatrical tears. Her body shuddered with sobs as she pulled out her phone. "I can't do this," she wailed, stabbing at the screen with a trembling finger. I can't do this alone. I knew who she was calling. Before I could even protest, she was speaking into the phone, her voice a choked, broken whisper. "Mom, it's Ethan. He's here and he's attacking me. He's saying horrible things. Saying I'm lying about Leo. I don't know why he's being so cruel." She hung up, leaving me standing there in the wreckage of the conversation. 10 seconds later, my phone rang. It was my father. I answered, ready to finally explain, to show them the proof. But I never got the chance. "Ethan, I don't know what has gotten into you," he boomed, his voice echoing with disappointment and anger. "But you will apologize to your sister right now. That woman is going through hell, and you choose today of all days to torment her? You call her back and you apologize, or you are no longer welcome in this family. Do you understand me?" He hung up, just like that. The family wall hadn't just gone up. It had been fortified with steel, and I was on the outside. I looked at Chloe, who was now watching me with cold, triumphant eyes, the tears already drying on her cheeks. I had come looking for a misunderstanding, for a way to keep the peace. Instead, I'd been excommunicated. And I realized, standing there in her perfect kitchen, that I was completely and utterly alone in this. I drove home from Chloe's in a daze, my father's angry words echoing in my ears. The silence in my apartment was a physical thing, pressing in on me. For my entire life, my job in the family was to be the bridge, the mediator, the one who absorbed the tension to keep us all connected. Now in the space of a 10-minute phone call, that bridge had been burned to the ground. They had made their choice. They had chosen her story over the truth. A strange sort of calm settled over me. The hurt was still there, a dull ache behind my ribs, but the panic was gone. My need to keep the peace had been rendered obsolete. I had no peace left to keep. All that remained was a single, cold, hard question. Was I crazy or was she lying? I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The person who avoided confrontation, the person who would rather apologize for something he didn't do than create a scene. That person was gone. He had been voted out of the family. In his place was someone else, someone I didn't quite recognize, someone who needed proof. I pulled up two windows side by side on my screen. On the left, the GoFundMe page, a monument to my sister's supposed suffering. On the right, her Instagram profile, a shrine to her vanity. And I started to build a timeline. It was meticulous, methodical work. I created a spreadsheet, 2 simple columns, date of plea and date of purchase. And the pattern. My God, the pattern was undeniable. August 10th, a desperate 4-paragraph post on the GoFundMe about needing $20,000 for a new, painful-sounding bone marrow stimulant. The post was shared hundreds of times. 2 days later, on August 12th, a smiling Instagram photo of Chloe showing off a brand new Peloton bike in her living room. Caption, "Keeping my body strong to fight for my baby." September 1st, a heart-wrenching update about Leo's appetite failing and needing $15,000 for intravenous nutritional supplements. September 3rd, an Instagram story from a high-end spa, a picture of her feet getting a pedicure. Text overlay, "Finding a moment of zen in the storm." On and on it went, a sick rhythm of fabricated crisis followed by luxury purchase. With every entry I added to the spreadsheet, a layer of my lifelong family loyalty flaked away, revealing the cold, hard certainty beneath. But this wasn't enough. This was circumstantial. I needed something concrete. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the children's hospital, my heart hammering against my ribs. I navigated the automated menu until I got a human being in the billing department. "Hello?" I started, my voice sounding strained, unfamiliar. "My name is Ethan. I'm Leo's uncle. I'd like to help the family by paying off a portion of his outstanding medical bills directly. Could you just tell me what the current balance is?" I held my breath. The woman on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment. I could hear the soft clicking of her keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice filled with genuine confusion. "Are you sure you have the right patient?" "Leo's account is fully paid. He has no outstanding balance. In fact," she continued, "he's not scheduled for any treatments at all. Just a routine checkup in 6 months. I thanked her and hung up, my hand trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. There it was. The first piece of external proof. The first brick in the wall of her lie that I could definitively knock down. Then I remembered something else. About a year ago, Chloe had called me in a panic, claiming she couldn't figure out how to pay a utility bill online and was about to get her power shut off. She'd given me her online banking password so I could just handle it for her. In her arrogance, in her certainty that I would always be on her side, I bet she never bothered to change it. I opened a new tab, went to the bank's website, and typed in her username and the password I still had saved in a file. It worked. I was in. And what I saw made me feel sick to my stomach. It was all there, laid out in cold, digital lines. Direct transfers from the GoFundMe linked savings account. $5,000 to a local BMW dealership. With the memo down payment. $7,000 to a luxury travel agency. Memo, Hawaiian family getaway. And hundreds, thousands of dollars in charges from upscale restaurants, designer boutiques, and day spas. I started taking screenshots, saving every single transaction to a secure folder. Each click was a final goodbye to the sister I thought I knew. I had the medical report. I had the hospital's confirmation. And now I had the money trail. I had all the ammunition I would ever need. Now I just had to see my nephew. I had to see for myself what this monstrous lie was doing to him. Getting to see Leo felt like planning a covert operation. My parents had made it clear I wasn't welcome at their Sunday dinner, but after a series of groveling texts where I vaguely apologized for adding to Chloe's stress, my mom finally relented. "Just for an hour," she'd said, "and you are not to upset your sister, do you understand?" The invitation felt less like an olive branch and more like a threat. I walked into my parents' house, the air thick with a tense, artificial cheerfulness. Chloe was there, of course, holding court in the living room, recounting some dramatic story about a mix-up with Leo's medication dosage. My father hung on her every word, his face a mask of concern. My mother just shot me a look that said, "Behave." I was an outsider now, a guest in my own family home, here on probation. I brought a gift for Leo, a new Lego set he'd been wanting. I found him in the den, sitting quietly on the floor, organizing his action figures into neat, perfect rows. He looked subdued. The wild, chaotic energy of a normal 9-year-old was gone, replaced by a strange, watchful stillness. I sat on the floor next to him, my knees cracking. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "Brought you something." His eyes lit up for a second when he saw the box, a flash of the old Leo. "Wow." "The Starfighter. Thanks, Uncle Ethan." But then, just as quickly, the light went out. His shoulders slumped. I kept my voice low, casual. "So how you feeling, pal?" "Really?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted nervously toward the doorway, toward the sound of his mother's voice in the other room. He swallowed, and when he spoke, his voice was a flat, robotic monotone. It was a voice I'd never heard from him before. "Mommy says my 6 cells are back," he recited, his eyes fixed on the action figure in his hand. "But we have to be brave." My heart broke. It was a line. A perfectly rehearsed, completely hollow line. As I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw it all. His cheeks were rosy, not pale. His arms sticking out of his t-shirt were toned and strong, not thin and frail. There were no dark circles under his eyes, no hint of fatigue. This was a perfectly healthy, vibrant child who was trying his absolute best to act sick. He was performing, and the strain of that performance was written all over his anxious little face. I leaned in closer, my voice barely a whisper. "Leo, you know you can tell me anything, right?" "Anything at all." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were pleading. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, shaking his head. He leaned forward, so close his breath was warm on my ear, and whispered a single devastating sentence. "Mommy gets sad if I run too fast." Before I could even process the words, the room suddenly felt colder. I looked up. Chloe was standing in the doorway, a sickly, sweet smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were like chips of ice. She had been listening. "There you are, my sweet boy," she cooed, gliding into the room. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted venom, a look that said, "You will pay for this." Then she scooped Leo up into a hug that looked more like an act of possession than affection. "Come on, sweetie. It's time to rest. You've had enough excitement for one day." She carried him out of the room, his little face buried in her shoulder. He didn't look back. I was left alone on the floor, surrounded by his perfectly ordered toys, the echo of his whisper ringing in my ears. He wasn't just being lied to. He was being made a co-conspirator in his own abuse. And that's when I knew. My conflict aversion, my lifelong habit of just letting things go to keep the peace. It was a luxury I could no longer afford. Because as I sat there, a cold, hard certainty crystallized in my mind. This wasn't the first time she had done something like this. That night, sleep was impossible. Leo's whispered words, "Mommy gets sad if I run too fast," played on a loop in my head. It was no longer a question of whether Chloe was lying, but for how long this pattern of behavior had been going on. I needed to see him as he was before all this. Before the supposed relapse. I needed a picture of a healthy, happy Leo, a baseline for the truth. I found myself in my dusty attic at 2 a.m, wrestling with a heavy plastic tub labeled family photos. I sneezed as I pried the lid off, the smell of old paper and memories filling the air. I started digging through stacks of glossy prints, birthdays, holidays, beach vacations, and there he was. Leo last summer, grinning with a gap in his teeth, his face smeared with chocolate ice cream. Healthy, vibrant, alive. I pulled the photo out, but as I did, something else came with it. A yellowed, folded piece of newsprint tucked between 2 pages of a photo album. It must have been used as a placeholder and forgotten. I unfolded it carefully. It was a clipping from our small hometown newspaper, the Creekside Chronicle. The date at the top read October 12th, 2014. 10 years ago. And there was Chloe. She was younger, her face framed by a different hairstyle, but the expression was hauntingly familiar. It was the same look she had in her GoFundMe photos, a carefully crafted blend of bravery and fragility. Her picture was next to a headline that made my blood run cold. Local woman's brave struggle with rare neurological disorder. I sank back on my heels, the dusty floorboards groaning under my weight. I remembered this. Vaguely, it was a strange, hazy memory from my college years. Chloe had been sick. For a few months. She'd had a host of bizarre, non-specific symptoms, chronic fatigue, mysterious nerve pain, dizzy spells. The doctors were stumped. Our parents were frantic. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. She was cured. We were all so relieved that no one really questioned it. We were just told not to talk about it, to let her move on. It was another one of those unspoken family rules, another topic to be avoided for the sake of peace. My eyes scanned the article. It was a masterclass in manipulation. It detailed Chloe's unwavering spirit in the face of a terrifying, unnamed illness. It talked about her mounting medical bills and her inability to work. And at the very bottom, there was a small paragraph that made my stomach drop. A community fund has been set up to help Chloe afford the specialist care she so desperately needs. It listed an account number at our local credit union. My mind was racing. Specialist care. What specialist care? I didn't remember any trips to the Mayo Clinic. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking. I did a quick search for the doctor mentioned in the article, a Dr. Alistair Finch. The name didn't bring up any medical licenses or hospital affiliations. But it did bring up one result, the archived website for a place called Serenity Path, a holistic wellness spa that had gone out of business 5 years ago. Their specialty wasn't neurology. It was hot stone massages and aromatherapy. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't a recent break from reality driven by financial desperation. This was a pattern. A calculated, predatory, lifelong pattern of behavior. Leo wasn't her first victim. He was just her most effective one. In that single, horrifying moment, the last vestiges of my conflict aversion, my need to keep the family peace, were burned away. It was an illusion. There was no peace to keep. There was only a predator and her prey. And I finally realized, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that she would never, ever stop. She would use that sweet little boy as her shield and her fundraising tool for the rest of his life, if she was allowed to. He would be trapped in a prison of feigned illness, his childhood stolen from him, all to feed her bottomless need for attention and validation. I walked down from the attic, leaving the photos scattered on the floor. I went to my kitchen, my movements calm and deliberate. The war inside me was over. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the contact for Child Protective Services. This call wouldn't just be declaring war on my sister. It would be a declaration of war on my entire family, and the lifetime of denial that had enabled her. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I pressed the call button. I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. It felt like the world was moving in slow motion. In my hand, my phone felt impossibly heavy, a small black brick that held the power to detonate my entire life. Every instinct I had, every lesson I'd ever learned about keeping the peace and not making waves, was screaming at me to put the phone down, to find another way. But I had seen my nephew's eyes. I had heard his whisper. There was no other way. My thumb hovered over the number I'd found online for the state's Child Protective Services hotline. My hand was shaking, a fine, barely perceptible tremor, but I could feel it buzzing up my arm. This was it. The point of no return. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you plunge into icy water, and I pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times, each chime echoing in the silence of my apartment like a judgment bell. Then a calm, professional voice answered. Child Protective Services, how may I direct your call? I need to make a report, I said, my voice sounding rough, foreign, about a child. My nephew. The operator, a woman with a tired but patient voice, began to ask me a series of standard questions. Name, address, the child's name, his age. With each answer, the reality of what I was doing became more concrete, more irreversible. Okay, sir, she said finally. Can you please tell me why you're concerned for the child's welfare? And I told her. I told her everything. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I laid out the facts with a cold, dispassionate precision that surprised even me. I felt like I was presenting a case in court, not reporting my own sister. I told her about Leo's real battle with leukemia and his complete, medically documented remission. I told her about the GoFundMe, the hundreds of thousands of dollars raised for a relapse that had never happened. I walked her through the bank statements, the direct transfers for a BMW, for a Hawaiian vacation, for designer handbags and spa treatments. I told her about the first con, the faked neurological disorder from 10 years ago, the newspaper clipping I still had sitting on my desk. And I told her about what Leo had whispered to me, that his mommy gets sad if he runs too fast. The woman on the other end of the line was silent the entire time. I could hear the faint, soft tapping of a keyboard, but she didn't interrupt me once. When I finally finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. I could feel the weight of everything I had just said hanging in the air between us. Then she spoke, her voice still calm, but with a new edge of seriousness to it. "Thank you for making this report, sir," she said. "We are taking this information very seriously. An investigator will be in contact with you within 24 hours. And that was it. I mumbled a thank you and hung up. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone slipping from my numb fingers and clattering onto the table. The silence in my apartment rushed back in, but it was different now. It was the quiet of an empty battlefield after the first shot has been fired. I had just declared war on my own family. I had set in motion a series of events that I could not stop, a machine that would grind forward and chew up everything in its path. There was a terrifying finality to it, but underneath the fear, underneath the profound sense of dread, there was something else, too. A tiny, fragile seedling of relief. For the first time, I hadn't tried to smooth things over. I hadn't tried to keep the peace. I had done what was right. I picked up my phone one last time. I opened up my text messages and found my sister's name. My thumbs moved with a steady purpose. 5 simple words. I know everything. I paused for a second, then added one more sentence. And I'm not going to let you do this to him anymore. I hit send. There was no going back now. I just had to wait for the fallout. And I knew it wouldn't be long before the Empire struck back. The a-hole. Am I the a-hole? That's what they called me. That's what the anonymous comments screamed from the bright blue glow of my phone screen, each one a tiny digital punch to the gut. What kind of monster torments a grieving mother? One said. Another, leave her alone, you psycho. Let her focus on her dying son. It seemed Chloe had received my text, and she had responded not with a phone call, not with a quiet word, but with a declaration of total war. It started with a phone call the next morning from a blocked number. Is this Ethan? A woman's voice asked. It was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. My name is Maria Albright. I'm an investigator with Child Protective Services. I'm calling to let you know we've received your report, and I've just concluded my initial home visit with your sister, Chloe. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Okay, what happened? I can't discuss the specifics of an open investigation, sir, she said, her tone giving nothing away. But I will need to schedule a formal interview with you tomorrow. And I suggest you stay off social media for a while. I didn't understand what she meant until I hung up and opened my laptop. And there it was. Chloe had gone live on Facebook. The video had been up for less than an hour, and already had thousands of views and hundreds of shares. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Chloe sat on her pristine white couch, her hair a perfect mess, tears streaming down her artfully smudged mascara. Leo was sitting next to her looking bewildered, a prop in her twisted theater. I don't know why my brother is doing this to us, she sobbed into the camera, her voice choked with manufactured pain.
He's always been unstable.
Ever since his last bad breakup, he just hasn't been the same. And now he's fixated on me, on my family. He's making these horrible, crazy accusations. He's trying to take my baby away from me during his final days. She pulled Leo into a fierce hug, burying his face in her shoulder so the camera couldn't see his expression. Please, she begged, her eyes finding the lens. Please, just pray for us. Pray that he gets the help he needs and leaves my dying son in peace. It was brilliant, and it was working. The comments section was a tidal wave of sympathy for her and pure, unadulterated venom for me. Her army of GoFundMe donors had been successfully weaponized. My phone started buzzing with notifications, private messages from people I'd never met, calling me a psychopath, a monster, a jealous loser who couldn't stand to see his sister get so much attention. They accused me of harassing a grieving mother, of trying to kidnap my nephew, of being a danger to society. And then, the call I had been dreading came. My mother's number flashed on the screen. I answered, my throat tight. But it wasn't my mother's voice. It was my father's, and he was screaming, "You did it!" He roared, his voice distorted with fury. You actually did it. You called the government on your own sister, on your own blood. Dad, you don't understand, I started. She's lying. I don't want to hear it. He cut me off. We are done with you, Ethan. Your mother is destroyed. You have chosen to side with strangers against your own family. You have brought shame on us, and you have broken your mother's heart. Don't call us. Don't come to our house. You are no longer our son. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the silence ringing in my ears. He hadn't just disowned me. He had delivered the verdict on behalf of the entire family. I was officially an enemy of the state of our family. Chloe hadn't just built a wall. She had convinced my parents to stand on top of it with rifles, aiming them directly at me. I sat there for a long time, the hateful comments and my father's words swirling in my head. The peacekeeper in me, the part that had run my life for so long, was screaming in agony. I had failed. I had shattered the family. But then, I thought of Leo. I thought of his whispered words, and I thought of the calm, professional voice of Investigator Albright. This wasn't a family drama anymore. This was an official investigation. And all of Chloe's tears and all of my parents' anger couldn't change the facts, and I had all the facts on my side. The walls were closing in, but they weren't closing in on me. They were closing in on her. While Chloe was busy playing the social media martyr, Investigator Albright was moving with the quiet, methodical precision of a hunter. Chloe's tearful videos and my parents' angry voicemails were just noise. Ms. Albright wasn't interested in the drama. She was interested in the data. And she was a bloodhound. She called me a few days after her initial visit to Chloe's. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice the same calm, unreadable tone as before. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence you provided. Now I'm moving forward with official subpoenas for medical and financial records. The truth has a way of showing up in the paperwork, and it did." A week later, Ms. Albright called me again. "I have a sworn affidavit from Dr. Evans," she said, and I could almost hear the click of another puzzle piece snapping into place. "He confirms, under penalty of perjury, that Leo is in perfect health and has not received any form of cancer treatment in over 2 years." The next piece came from the bank. "The financial records are illuminating," Ms. Albright told me, and for the first time I detected a hint of something other than pure professionalism in her voice, maybe a touch of grim satisfaction. "The bank has provided records of every transaction from the donation account. It seems your nephew's palliative care involved a $5,000 down payment to a BMW dealership and a $7,000 deposit for a family suite at a resort in Hawaii." The net was tightening, strand by strand. I could almost feel it pulling taut around Chloe, but she, in her monumental arrogance, was completely oblivious. In fact, she seemed to think she was winning. Buoyed by the outpouring of online sympathy, she felt untouchable, confident that her performance was enough to fool anyone. So when Ms. Albright called her to schedule a formal on-the-record interview, Chloe eagerly agreed. This was her chance, she must have thought, to sit down with this woman and win her over, to solidify her role as the tragic, beleaguered mother. She had spent a lifetime manipulating people with her tears and her stories. Why would this be any different? Ms. Albright told me about the interview later. She said Chloe walked into the sterile, gray interview room at the CPS office like she was walking onto a stage. She had her story polished, her emotions perfectly calibrated. She launched into a long, rambling narrative, a tangled web of lies and half-truths. She talked about confusing test results, experimental treatments that weren't on the official books, and doctors who gave her contradictory information. She claimed the luxury purchases were gifts from anonymous, wealthy donors who wanted her to have moments of joy during her struggle. She cried, she raged, she pleaded. It was, Ms. Albright said, a truly masterful performance, but Ms. Albright didn't react. She just sat there, her hands folded on the table, letting Chloe talk. And as Chloe spun her increasingly elaborate lies, Ms. Albright would occasionally glance down at the laptop open in front of her, her expression unchanging. She'd listen to Chloe insist that a $10,000 charge at a designer store was for special organic linens to help with Leo's night sweats. And then she would make a small, quiet note on her computer. She let Chloe insist that the trip to Hawaii was a last-wish trip, paid for by a church group. And then she'd make another note. She was letting Chloe dig her own grave. With every lie, Chloe was burying herself deeper and deeper under a mountain of documented, verifiable proof to the contrary. She was so confident in her own story, so used to people believing her, that she never once considered that the woman sitting across from her already knew the truth. She thought she was in control. She had no idea that the walls had already closed in around her, and that the only thing left was for the trap to be sprung. And Ms. Albright had the perfect plan for that. A little something she called a family conference. The room investigator Albright had chosen for the family conference was designed to have no personality at all. It was a small, windowless box with beige walls, a scuffed laminate table, and 4 uncomfortable-looking chairs. The air hummed with the flat, buzzing sound of a fluorescent light overhead. It was the perfect, sterile environment for a family to be dissected. I arrived first. When my parents walked in a few minutes later, followed by Chloe, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. My mother, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield, wouldn't even look at me. My father gave me a look of such profound disappointment, it was like a physical blow. He sat down directly across from me, his back ramrod straight, his jaw tight. They had come here not to listen, but to defend. They were a united front, a fortress of denial with Chloe safely in the middle. Chloe herself looked radiant. She was dressed in an expensive-looking white blazer, looking less like a grieving mother and more like a CEO about to close a deal. She gave me a small, pitying smile as she sat down, a look that said, "You poor, confused little man. This will all be over soon." "I hope you're happy, Ethan," my father began, his voice a low growl. "Dragging us down here, putting your sister through this." Before he could continue, the door opened and Miss Albright walked in. She was carrying a single thick folder. The room fell silent. She didn't acknowledge the tension. She simply sat at the head of the table and placed the folder in front of her. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice calm and even. "The purpose of this meeting is to review the findings of my investigation. I'm going to present my evidence, and I ask that you hold all questions until the end." She looked at my parents, then at Chloe, and finally at me. Then she opened the folder. The first thing she pulled out was a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table toward my father. "This," she said, "is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Marcus Evans, Leo's oncologist, dated last Tuesday." My father picked it up. My mother leaned over his shoulder to read. I watched their faces. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. The rigid certainty in my father's posture began to sag. My mother's hand went to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. The words on that page, "fully in remission, no signs of malignant activity," were directly contradicting the daughter they had built their entire world around protecting. Before they could even speak, Ms. Albright laid out the next exhibit, a series of enlarged color printouts of bank statements. She used a pen to point to a line item. "This is a direct transfer from the Leo's Fight donation account for $5,250 to a BMW dealership," she said, her voice a flat monotone. She pointed to another. "This is a charge for $1,800 at a luxury day spa, and this is a $7,000 deposit made to a travel agency." "Those are fake," Chloe shrieked, her voice suddenly shrill. "He faked those. Ethan did this. He's a monster. He's trying to ruin me." Ms. Albright didn't even look at her. She just reached into her folder and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. "You told me in your interview, Chloe," she said, her eyes still on the papers, "that the trip to Hawaii was a final wish trip, a gift from an anonymous church group, and that nothing was finalized." Chloe nodded frantically, sensing a lifeline. "Yes, that's right. It was just an idea. Ms. Albright pressed a button on the recorder. A cheerful, tinny voice filled the silent room. "Aloha Travel, this is Brenda speaking." Then Chloe's voice clear as a bell. "Hi, Brenda, I was just calling to confirm, is the $7,000 deposit for the Anderson family's Hawaii trip fully non-refundable?" Brenda's voice came back. "Oh yes, ma'am. As we discussed, once you book the presidential suite, that deposit is locked in. But don't you worry, you are going to have an absolutely magical time." Ms. Albright stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. I looked at my parents. They were hollowed out, their faces pale, their eyes empty. The fortress had been breached. The walls had come down. They were utterly and completely defeated, and then Chloe. She broke. But it wasn't with remorse. It wasn't with shame. It was a breakdown of pure narcissistic rage. Her face, a moment ago a mask of victimhood, contorted into something ugly and unrecognizable. She stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. "You!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this! You were always jealous. You couldn't stand that I had something that people cared about me." She spun to face Ms. Albright. "And you twist everything. You sit there with your fake papers and your little recordings. You have no idea what I've been through." She looked at our parents, her eyes wild. "And you too? You just sit there? You're supposed to be on my side. He's the one who is sick, not me." She stood there, panting, in the center of the room, exposed and utterly alone in her lies. And in that moment, I saw her for what she truly was. Not a grieving mother, not my sister, but a black hole of need, willing to consume anyone and anything to feed her own emptiness. The reckoning was here, but the case wasn't truly closed until the one person who mattered most had a chance to speak. While the wreckage of our family was still settling in that beige conference room, another, much quieter meeting was taking place a few doors down. Investigator Albright had explained that the final step of her investigation was an interview with Leo himself. But it wouldn't be with her. It would be in a specially designed room, with a child psychologist who knew how to speak the language of trauma. I waited in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My parents had been escorted to a separate waiting area. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional distant ring of a telephone. I kept picturing Leo, my brave, sweet nephew, alone in a room with strangers, being asked to explain the unexplainable. The psychologist, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Ramirez, told me later what had happened in that room. It was a space designed to feel safe, with soft chairs, colorful drawings on the walls, and a box of toys on a small rug. Ms. Albright was present, but she sat quietly in a corner, just observing. Dr. Ramirez didn't ask Leo about being sick. She didn't use words like cancer or lie. Instead, she sat on the floor with him and took out a set of simple wooden dolls, a mommy, a daddy, a little boy, and a man she called the uncle. She pushed the box of toys toward him. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's easier to show me things with the toys than to use words. Can you show me what a normal day is like at your house?" Leo was hesitant at first. He just stared at the dolls, his small hands twisting in his lap. But Dr. Ramirez was patient. She just waited. Finally, he reached out a trembling hand and picked up the mommy doll. He held it for a long moment. Then he picked up the uncle doll. He made the uncle doll walk over to the little boy doll. He didn't say anything, just acted it out. Then he looked up at Dr. Ramirez, his eyes wide. He pointed a small finger at the mommy doll. "She told me to tell Uncle Ethan my tummy hurt," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Ramirez just nodded slowly. "She told you to say your tummy hurt?" Leo nodded, his eyes filling with tears. She said he would be mad if I didn't." He looked down, his little shoulders starting to shake. He finally looked back up at Dr. Ramirez, and he asked the question that had clearly been poisoning his every waking moment. The secret fear that had been buried under all the layers of his mother's lies. "Am I going to get sick again?" he asked, his voice cracking. The psychologist's heart must have broken in that moment. "Mommy said I would. She said I would get the sick cells back if I wasn't a good actor." A good actor. That's what she had turned him into. Not a son, not a child, but a performer in her sick, twisted play. That single heartbreaking admission was all they needed. It was the final, irrefutable proof of the emotional abuse he had been enduring. The door to the hallway opened, and Ms. Albright walked out, her face grim but resolute. She looked at me. "We have what we need," she said quietly. "I'm filing for an emergency removal. The state is taking temporary custody of Leo, effective immediately." She paused, her eyes softening for just a fraction of a second. "And given the circumstances and your cooperation in this investigation, we're asking the court to place him with you." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Me. He was coming to me. The weight of it, the terror of it, the profound gut-wrenching relief of it. It all washed over me at once. The war was over, and my only thought was that I had to get my nephew out of here. I had to take him home. The aftermath, the legal battles, the shattered pieces of our family, all of that could wait. For now, I just had to get to Leo. The days that followed were a blur of sterile offices and legal paperwork. I saw my sister only once from a distance at her arraignment. She stood before the judge, small and defiant in a drab courtroom jumpsuit, and pleaded not guilty to charges of felony fraud and child endangerment. The GoFundMe account was frozen, its assets seized as evidence. News of the investigation broke online, and Chloe's army of supporters fractured into factions of angry disbelief and bitter betrayal. The empire she had built on a foundation of lies had crumbled into dust. My life was completely reconfigured. I was a bachelor in a one-bedroom apartment, and suddenly I was a guardian, a parent. Leo and I started our new, strange life together. The first few weeks were quiet. He was a ghost in my apartment, tiptoeing around, speaking in whispers as if he was afraid to take up space. He didn't know how to just be a kid anymore. He had to be taught. We started therapy both together and separately. Our therapist, a patient man with kind eyes, helped us build a new language, one that wasn't based on secrets and fear. And slowly, painstakingly, the real Leo began to emerge. It started with small things. One afternoon, he kicked a soccer ball in the living room and knocked over a lamp. He froze, his eyes wide with terror, waiting for the reprimand. I just looked at the shattered lamp, looked at him, and said, "Well, I never liked that lamp anyway. Want to see if you can hit the couch next?" The look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face was the first real breakthrough we had. And then he laughed. A real, genuine belly laugh. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. He was finally allowed to run. He was finally allowed to be loud. He was finally allowed to be a messy, chaotic, wonderful 9-year-old boy. I saw my parents at a preliminary court hearing a month later. They were sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom, looking broken. They looked older, smaller, their faces etched with a grief that was entirely of their own making. During a recess, my mother caught my eye from across the room. She mouthed 2 words at me. "I'm sorry." I just gave a small, sad nod. An apology wasn't enough to bridge the vast, gaping chasm that now existed between us. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I had chosen to save my nephew, and in doing so, I had been forced to sacrifice my own parents. Months passed. The legal proceedings crawled forward. Chloe's trial date was set. But in our small, quiet apartment, Leo and I were building a new world. A world with different rules. Rules like it's okay to be loud, it's okay to make a mess, and you never ever have to pretend your tummy hurts. This morning, we went to the local nursery. Leo picked out a young oak sapling, its leaves a vibrant, hopeful green. We spent the afternoon in the small patch of grass behind my apartment building, digging a hole in the stubborn, rocky soil. We worked together, our hands covered in dirt, the sun warm on our backs. When the hole was finally deep enough, we lowered the sapling in, its roots reaching down into the cool earth. As we filled the hole back in, tamping down the soil around the thin, fragile trunk, Leo started to giggle. He had a smudge of dirt on his nose. "What's so funny, buddy?" I asked, smiling. "You have dirt in your hair," he said, laughing that free, beautiful laugh of his. I reached up and felt the grit. I just laughed with him. I looked at this incredible, resilient little boy, his face bright with joy, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I had made the right, impossible choice. I had destroyed my family to save him. I wasn't the asshole. I was what he needed me to be. I was a parent.